Over 100 reports. Can you imagine that? Making over 100 reports about your child being abused
It's hard to even fathom.
and having those reports dismissed. Only for, well, the unthinkable to happen.
Absolutely tragic.
Your child dies. That's exactly what happened to 6-year-old Cory Micciolo.
It's a case that really, really shook a lot of people, especially online.
Yeah, because of that awful gym surveillance footage.
Yeah, really hard to watch.
So today, we're going to deep dive into this whole story.
Absolutely, let's do it.
We're going to be looking at court transcripts, news articles, even a really popular true crime podcast episode that went into this whole thing.
Yeah, tried to unpack it all.
Really tried to understand. So our mission today is to try to figure out what led up to Cory's death.
Understand why this abuse just kept going on.
Despite all those warnings.
Right, so many red flags.
And there are still some unsettling questions.
Oh, absolutely. This case raises so many important questions about, well, frankly, how we protect children.
Exactly. So to get into all of this, let's go back to the beginning. Cory was born in 2014.
To a young mother, Brianna.
And she struggled with substance abuse. And Cory lived with her and some extended family.
Until he was about 5 years old.
He never even met his father.
Not until a paternity test came back.
Which revealed that Cory's father was a man named Christopher Gregory.
And that's where things get complicated. That's when that custody battle began.
Yeah. And it's important to note that during all this, Brianna, she was trying to deal with her substance abuse. She went to rehab.
Right, really trying to get her life back on track.
And so while she was in rehab, Christopher got custody of Cory.
But when Brianna was able to show that she was, sober and getting her life together, she was granted joint custody.
Right, things were looking up.
You would think so.
And this is where it gets really, infuriating.
Yeah.
Brianna starts filing these reports.
With the Department of Child Protection and Permanency, or DCPP.
BCPP. And she's documenting these injuries on Cory. We're not talking about, just little scrapes and bruises here.
No, we're talking serious stuff.
Black eyes, bite marks, the kind of things that, well, no child should have.
And what's really unbelievable here is just how many reports there were. Over 100.
Over 100 reports.
It's not like this was just, a parent kind of overreacting to every little thing.
Right.
This is a pattern of documented injuries.
Clear pattern.
And yet, for some reason, the DCPP didn't really do a good job of investigating these claims.
Which is, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it all kind of leads up to this awful incident at Christopher's apartment complex gym.
Back in March of 2021.
You might remember this.
Hear from the news.
Surveillance footage comes out, and it shows Christopher forcing Cory, who was just 6 at the time, to run on a treadmill.
At these crazy high speeds.
Way too fast for a little kid.
And Cory, of course, kept falling off.
And you can see Christopher yelling at him, yanking him back onto the treadmill.
Even biting him.
It's tough to watch.
I think it really caught everyone's attention because, well, it was so visual.
So visceral.
You see this little kid being, abused.
And it makes you wonder how any parent could do that to their child.
Exactly.
And after this, Brianna kept documenting these injuries.
Right.
And she started noticing Cory was, acting different.
More withdrawn, more scared.
It was clear something was wrong.
Really wrong.
So on March 31st, she files for emergency custody.
She's fearing for Cory's life at this point.
She has the treadmill footage. She has all these reports.
Yeah, all this evidence.
And yet...
a judge sees the treadmill footage.
And still denies the request for emergency custody.
He's unbelievable.
And just 2 days later, Cory dies in the hospital.
April 2nd, 2021.
He had a seizure during a CT scan.
Couldn't revive him.
Initially, the medical examiner ruled the death as undetermined.
But then, a forensic pathologist changed it to homicide.
Because of all this evidence of chronic abuse.
And this is where you really start to see those systemic failures.
Yeah.
You have all these reports going to DCPP.
Over 100.
You have a judge who has actually seen this disturbing footage.
Of a father abusing his son.
And yet, nothing happens.
It's devastating.
Think about all those missed opportunities.
There's so many chances to step in and protect this kid.
Yeah.
And of course, all of this leads to Christopher's trial.
Which really put a spotlight on those systemic issues we were just talking about.
Yeah, so let's talk about that trial.
It was a very complex trial. So Christopher was charged with child neglect and then later with murder.
But he kept saying he was innocent throughout the whole thing.
The whole time. Maintained his innocence.
And his defense, they tried to use Brianna's past against her.
They said, look, she had struggled with substance abuse.
Tried to say she wasn't reliable. But Thankfully, the prosecution brought in other people who could back up what Brianna was saying.
Yeah, like Cory's teacher, his pediatrician.
People who had expressed concern about Cory.
They had seen those signs of abuse. They documented it.
And that really helped push back against the defense's claims.
Yeah, because they were trying to say Brianna wasn't credible.
But then the prosecution brought up some pretty disturbing stuff about Christopher.
Oh, yeah.
Like they showed the jury his Google searches from around the time Cory died.
And he was searching things like how to hide bruises.
And even legal process after a murder.
I mean, that's pretty chilling.
Super chilling.
And the prosecution argued that these searches, along with his behavior at the hospital when Cory was dying, it showed he didn't really care.
Yeah, like he had no remorse.
Maybe even, like, a sense of relief.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But we're going to get into all of it.
Yeah. Stick with us.
Yeah, it does make you think, like, what was he really feeling? But I think it's important to point out that the trial wasn't just about that treadmill incident.
Right. Because that happened, like weeks before Cory actually died?
Yeah, weeks before.
The prosecution was really trying to use that footage to show that there was this, pattern of abuse.
A pattern, yeah.
They wanted the jury to understand that this wasn't just some isolated thing.
It's terrifying to think about what else might have happened to Cory in those last few weeks of his life.
Especially knowing that he was probably, too scared to say anything.
Yeah, I mean, who would he even tell? And that's why I think the prosecution's focus on Christopher's behavior after Cory went to the hospital was so important.
Yeah, it was. Witnesses said that he seemed, strangely detached.
Detached.
Yeah, almost like he didn't care that Cory was in the hospital.
The podcast we listened to, they said he was calm and casual in the ER.
Which, I mean, come on. Your son is literally fighting for his life.
Yeah, it's just bizarre.
And then there's the fact that he actually left the hospital.
What?
Yeah, while Cory was still, in critical condition, he went to visit his mother.
He just walked out.
And of course, the prosecution said that this was proof that he didn't actually care about Cory.
I can't even imagine leaving my child in the hospital like that.
Most parents would be, right there by their side, hoping and praying for them to get better.
Praying for a miracle.
Right. But Christopher just left.
The prosecution really hammered on that. They said his actions spoke louder than words.
Yeah, they did. And then there were those Google searches we talked about before, the ones he made right after Cory died.
Like, how long after an autopsy to file charges?
Just so disturbing.
It makes you wonder what was going through his mind.
Right. I mean, was he already thinking about how to get away with it?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely paints a disturbing picture.
Yeah, it does. And when you combine that with the fact that he tried to tell his mom what to say when she testified.
He what?
Yeah, he tried to coach her, tell her what to say to help his case.
It doesn't look good.
It really doesn't. It makes it seem like he was more worried about protecting himself than he was about, grieving for his son.
Right. And it seems like the jury picked up on that, at least to some degree, because they did find him guilty.
Of aggravated manslaughter.
Right, but not murder.
That's a really important distinction.
What's the difference, legally speaking?
Well, to put it simply, murder requires intent. The prosecution has to prove that the person meant to kill someone.
Okay.
But with aggravated manslaughter, you don't need that same level of intent.
So it's more about, reckless actions that lead to someone dying.
Exactly. So in this case, the jury might have believed that what Christopher was doing was reckless, and that's what ultimately killed Cory.
But they weren't sure if he actually intended to kill him.
That's one way to interpret the verdict.
It's tough, because we can't know for sure what they were thinking.
Yeah, those jury deliberations are confidential.
Right. But I keep coming back to that question of, what specifically caused Cory's death?
I mean, we know there was that history of abuse, but was it one specific injury, or was it just years of trauma?
It's a good question.
The medical examiner said that Cory died from an acute traumatic injury.
Okay.
But they couldn't say for sure what caused that injury.
So we know abuse was a factor.
Absolutely.
But we may never know exactly what happened in those final moments.
It's true. But the forensic pathologist was very clear that this was a homicide.
A homicide.
And that it happened because of chronic abuse.
Which, that just proves that Brianna was right to be so worried.
Yeah, all those years she was trying to get someone to help Cory.
Over 100 reports.
Over 100 reports, and a judge saw that video and still didn't do anything.
This case is like a textbook example of how the system can fail so badly.
And with devastating consequences.
It's just heartbreaking, to to think about what Cory went through
No, it makes you realize that this could happen anywhere,
to anyone.
even with people who seem, normal on the outside.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we can't just assume everything's okay.
We have to be vigilant, we have to pay attention, and we have to speak up if something seems wrong.
So let's talk about that. What can we do as individuals to be more proactive?
Right. Like, what can we do to protect kids?
What signs should we be looking for? Because sometimes it's not as obvious as, a black eye or a bruise.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? What can we actually do?
It's tough. It's easy to feel overwhelmed,
Yeah, totally. Like, what can one person really do?
But even just being aware is a huge first step.
So, okay, awareness.
Yeah.
What exactly should we be on the lookout for? Because like you said, sometimes it's not as obvious as a bruise or something.
Right, exactly. I mean, physical signs are important, but you also got to pay attention to how kids are acting if their behavior changes.
Like what kind of changes?
Well, maybe they're suddenly really withdrawn,
Oh,
or they seem more anxious, more aggressive than usual. Maybe they're scared of certain people or places.
I see.
Even if they start, regressing developmentally,
Oh, wow.
that's a big one. So it's kind of about trusting your gut if something feels off.
Yeah, if something feels wrong. Or if, like, a kid's explanation for an injury doesn't quite add up.
Right, right.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, ask questions.
And if you're still worried, you got to report it
report it to
to the authorities.
right, right. But I think a lot of people might hesitate to do that.
Yeah, I get it.
They don't want to overstep or, accuse someone falsely.
I understand.
But in a situation like this,
It's better to be safe than sorry.
doing nothing could be so much worse.
Exactly. And remember, reporting it, it's not about, like, getting involved in someone else's business.
It's about protecting a child.
potentially saving their life.
And Cory's story shows us that sometimes those reports are the only way someone knows what's going on.
It's sad, but it's true.
It could literally be a lifeline for a kid who's trapped.
So if you see something, say something.
So practically speaking, who do we contact?
Well, your local child protective services.
DCPP.
Right, the DCTP. Or the police department. And there are national hotlines too, like the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline.
You can even call anonymously.
Exactly. You can stay anonymous.
We'll put all that info in the show notes.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important to, share this beyond just listening to the episode.
Definitely. Talk to people about this. Your family, friends, neighbors.
Yeah, spread awareness.
The more people who know about this, the better.
It takes a village, right?
It really does. We can't just rely on the system to catch everything.
We all have to be looking out for each other.
Especially for kids.
And Cory, well, his story is just so sad. It shows us that this can happen anywhere.
And that we can't be complacent.
We have to be aware, we have to pay attention, and we have to have the courage to speak up.
For those who can't speak for themselves.
It's hard to think about, but we can't bring Cory back.
No, we can't.
But we can honor his memory by trying to prevent this from happening to other kids.
By fighting for better child protection systems. By supporting organizations that work to prevent abuse.
And just being more present in our communities. So to everyone listening, you can make a difference. Trust your instincts.
Ask questions.
Speak up. You could literally change a child's life.
Cory's story is a reminder that unchecked abuse can have devastating consequences, and that the systems that are supposed to protect kids can fail. So let's learn from this. Let's work to make things better.
If you want to learn more about child abuse prevention, there are tons of resources out there.
We recommend checking out the website for the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline. We'll link it in the show notes.
And please share this episode. Start those conversations.
Every child deserves to be safe.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It was a tough one.
It was. But these are important conversations to have.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And never stop fighting for those who need us most.
Goodbye.